Hello everyone, this is Solomon here again with HR with Solomon. Once again, welcome back to the show. Hope you had a great summer. Today I have a special guest. It's a very special guest because nowadays people are started thinking about the well-being. Previous last generation is more often physical well-being. Now people are more talking about the mental health. So today I am thrilled to join with Alison Butler, a dedicated advocate for building healthier and more resilient workplace. She, as a chief wellness officer and the owner of Allison Butler Training Inc, Allison partners with organization all across the Canada and delivers the specific workplace mental health and prevention of burnout of an employees and stress management. She brings the expertise to our conversation, and she also holds masters in employee relationship from Memorial University and professional certification in trauma resilience from the Florida State of University. Certified mental health aid trainer and is deeply committed to the normalization of well-being, wellness of employees and conversation with teams to help to prioritize mind and body and soulful workplace. Welcome, Alison. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing great, and it's a pleasure to be here chatting with you today.
Yeah, it's like the sector you are into. It's a great session now because previously last decade previous of focusing on more of physical work life balance and everything. Mental health is being playing predominant role in terms of uh, keeping the employees up and running in the organization. Could you able to tell us audience what you do as an organization for the companies and the employees?
Absolutely. I do quite a few things, but my main focus in the business is to deliver mental health first aid training. And this is training that's designed for workplaces to help I always say, anyone who works with people to better understand mental health and how we support employees in the organization if they are experiencing challenges with their mental health. And by the way, that includes things like stress and burnout, things that are being talked about a lot more. I also do a lot of burnout awareness and prevention with workplaces. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes. But I'm also working with workplaces to start thinking about being more preventative instead of reactive when we're thinking about workplace wellness, especially from a mental health and psychological safety perspective. So a lot of what we do now in our workplaces is actually it's important, but it's actually very reactive to problems or challenges. So I help people think about it from an earlier perspective or a more preventative perspective. And that looks a little bit different for every workplace. So that's more of the consulting side of things. And then I also have the training.
Yeah, it's a great, or like great thing you're doing for the organization. So moving on to the first question of the session, like workplace wellness philosophy. As a chief wellness officer, how do you define the psychological safety workplace, and what is the first step a company should take if they realize that they are falling short of this standard?
This is a great question. It's actually a really big question, but I'm going to try to keep it fairly simple if we can and straightforward for today. We can go online and we can look at definitions of psychological safety. It's everywhere and a lot of people are talking about it. But I still feel like for a lot of people it's hard to really understand what that looks like in the day-to-day of our organizations and our businesses. So, I'm going to share with you what psychological safety looks like or feels like in a workplace. So, it looks like, are people able to ask questions? Someone doesn't understand something. Are they putting up their hand and speaking up? Is someone, berating them, making fun of them for not knowing something? Is someone saying, "Oh, don't worry about that," or "We already talked about that yesterday"? So is there that culture where people can kind of feel comfortable with speaking up if they're unsure about something? That's one piece. It can also look like if someone, and this is where this kind of connects a lot into physical safety and health and safety in a workplace as well. If someone sees something that they think might be dangerous or unsafe, if they see that someone is behaving in a way that doesn't align with company values, are they able or willing to speak up about that and share information about that without fear of the repercussions of what might happen after that? Like, am I going to lose my job because I brought this to somebody's attention? And it also looks like, is this an environment where I can share my ideas, where I can bring something forward? Hey, I think it would be, it might be a good idea for us to consider this idea. So, is it a space where people's voices are heard and listened to and valued? We may not follow through with everyone's idea, that's not always possible, but is it a place where we can share these things? I also think a big part of psychological safety in a workplace is where people can say, you know what? I made a mistake. And that includes leadership. And that's not always easy to do. So, some organizations have more psychological safety than others, but that's what it can look like in a really practical day-to-day space. Now, in practice, when we look at, okay, maybe we don't have these things. Maybe all of our meetings are really quiet and everyone's just sort of following through. The first step can be a little bit tricky, but without talking for hours, I think one of the first things that workplaces need to do is to really just sit back and start thinking about some of these things. And then there are measurement tools that we can use to help us determine where are we on a scale. Usually employees participate in those measurement tools. And we can see, all right, where might I want to start addressing things first? We don't know what we don't know. So there's tools that we can use in our workplaces to help us determine where we are as a psychologically safe workplace.
Yeah, because why I ask this question is like sometimes, as you said, if you are not giving the space to the employees to speak up, it could create, a different set of mindset to the employees. This place or my supervisor is not open up to the conversation. It makes sense. By the time it get like piling up, it could create a different situation, stress to the employees. That makes sense. And the tools you told, it's greater for the employee engagement and everything. Thanks for that. Moving on to the
Absolutely.
next question. Yeah, this is will be like this could be the next question is, everyone could feel the same. Burnout prevention. With your background in, burnout prevention training, what is the early sign that the HR leader should look before the employee reaches out? I am totally exhausted.
This is so good. I talk about this all the time with workplaces. There's many early warning signs, and it can look different from employee to employee. One thing that I always think is worth mentioning is that I burned out as an employee, and I was very passionate about my work. I'm a high performer and a high achiever. And that was a really interesting piece of my journey because I was doing well until I suddenly wasn't anymore. And so it's interesting. There's often this connection to burnout of very low energy, exhaustion, lack of interest in work when maybe the employee was previously really involved in things. But I think some of the earlier warning signs are a little bit harder to spot. It can actually look like someone who's working all the time, not taking their vacation that they have, always saying yes to working extra hours. I happen to do a lot of work in industrial type workplaces. So when we have things like shift work, for example, employees who are putting up their hands for overtime shifts, extra shifts all the time, those kinds of things are, if it's short term, it's probably okay. but longer term could actually be problematic for certain employees. And when we look at office work, people who are working all day, but also working every evening, never switching off their laptop, always responding to things right away, that creates this mental load that can really build up over time. So I always say to watch high performers in an organization because they can be really at risk. That was my scenario that happened to me. And so just really being mindful. But I think the other big warning sign is employees who have previously been very involved, very on top of things, who are maybe suddenly not as involved, or who are submitting things after deadlines. Those are all little warning signs or big warning signs that we should be thinking about in organizations. I also think sometimes it can be very invisible unless we are having good conversations with our people on a regular basis, because it can be very subtle. I can be showing up every day and going through the motions of my work, which is what I did for a really long time, and still be really struggling. So I think it's really important that we're having these conversations in our workplace and really getting people thinking about. And so I kind of spoke then from my own experiences as a high performer, and that's really important. But we also, from an organizational perspective, want to be looking at if we are expecting people to always be doing more with less, that is a workplace systemic burnout problem. Right? So things like hiring, making sure that the team has people with the skills to do the work instead of expecting people to be able to figure it out is a really important. I just want to make sure that I mentioned that because there's two sides of it, and the workplace does have a responsibility for that burnout piece as well. It's not just all on the employee.
So moving on to the next question, like the strategical retention, how can the organization effectively link their mental health and the wellness initiative to build a long-term employee retentionship and overall attracting the talent strategies in an organization?
This is great. I mentioned earlier about how I'm really big on thinking about prevention in the workplace and thinking about how do we prevent some challenges that people might experience. I think it's really important that we both consider what supports we have for people now. So usually in workplaces that looks like having an employee assistance program where people can avail of mental health type supports for themselves. Also, in a lot of workplaces, we would have our insurance and healthcare benefits where we could avail of mental health supports as well. I think a lot of times we leave the conversation there of like, oh, yeah, we do wellness activities with our team. We have good supports available to them. So we've got great mental health in our workplace. But really, I think a lot of this comes back to if we want to have long-term retention and if we want to be attracting really good talent, the wellness piece and the burnout prevention starts much earlier. It's what do our policies say about how we treat mental health and wellness? And then not just that, because a lot of organizations have it in the policy, but how do we live that policy in our day-to-day culture? And what does that look like? Personally, I know that a lot of people leave their roles, but they don't always tell the full truth when they leave. So, people feel burned out. People don't feel supported. And they might be honest, but a lot of times it's like, I found something else. I found a better fit. I want a new challenge, and so I think that there's a lot of that going on that organizations are maybe not fully paying attention to. So we have to start much earlier. And I also think it looks like connecting with our people, talking to our people, really understanding what does their workload feel like? How do they feel? We want people who are well in our workplaces. And when people are mentally well, they're more productive, they perform better, they're more creative, they're more focused. There's so much research that backs that up. So I think we need to be having those conversations at really early stages in an organization. And then we need to be having these types of conversations all the time, the same way that we would talk about, cash flow, finances. We need to be, I think, thinking about our people in a different way than we have in the past. So there's lots of work to do there.
I can tell that this is a great, early sign for the employer in terms of keeping the talent, because the moment the person who get the job, like he was trying to say that it could be their problem. I'm not anymore with an employee, but if you create a good relationship with the employees, it could be, even though the company is not paying well, with a good working experience or workplace environment which the company creates, people will stay long. That's a great message. So moving on to the next question, I want to talk about the generational perspective, drawing you on your employee relationship studies regarding with the generation attitude, how you can see the expectations of the workplace mental health support changing across all different age groups in workforce, like from one generation to generation.
I'm so happy that you're asking me this question. And this really pulls from some of the research that I did in my master's program, but also just things that I see day to day when I'm in workplaces and interacting with people in organizations. And it's so interesting. We're in a really unique dynamic in our workplaces today where we have maybe the biggest of different generations in some workplaces. And it's really fascinating. One of the big things in the perspective of mental health, one of the most interesting things that I see is we do have a big generational divide in how we think about and talk about mental health. And so I don't want to generalize too much, but often younger employees are more comfortable with talking about mental health, with sharing things, with being much more open about maybe things that they're experiencing, how they feel. In general, older generations have often come from a background or grown up in a way that this is not something that we talk about. And one of my favorite things about the work that I do is training, particularly managers, supervisors, and leaders in things like mental health first aid so that we sort of get this baseline of feeling more comfortable talking about these topics. And in fact, so many managers say that that's why or one of the reasons why they are interested in training. They're very interested, but they're nervous about the topic because historically it has just been something that we don't talk about. And also, another thing that I think is worth mentioning, in Canada we have so many diverse perspectives of employees. And so culturally, we also see that, some people come from cultures where this is not really something that we talk about. And now I'm in Canada and everybody is talking about it. So there's also that element of things that I think is really important too. So, I mean, I always just encourage people to be open to learning. With every new generation, we see different things, different things happening. And I'm really, really happy with the people that I meet and see. And we're kind of getting everyone on the same playing field in terms of knowledge about mental health, skills, how do we talk about it, what's the most appropriate thing to do and say. And maybe from even a younger employee perspective, they'll say, "Oh, I'm really comfortable talking about this, but I need to know what's most appropriate for the workplace." So there's elements of mental health first aid that will help there as well. So I love talking about different generations in the workplace and mental health. And I think it's just something that we need to keep talking about.
So this is the next question and the last question for the session. And you have navigated with the diverse roles from the project management in the technology. Now you are advocating the wellness of mental wellness. What is the most important lesson you have learned about maintaining your own resilience while supporting others' mental health?
This is something that I practice every day. I also talk a lot about resilience when I'm working with different teams. And I think the most important thing that I've learned is that I have to keep working on supporting myself. It's something that a lot of us maybe don't take as seriously as we should, and our mental health impacts everything about our lives. It can actually impact our physical health, how we feel physically, it can impact our work significantly, and it can also impact how we show up for our families and friends. And so a lot of people that I meet, and I've been one of them, which is why I emphasize that the practice is so important. We maybe just don't take that seriously and we're like, "Oh, I'll get to that later," or "I don't have time." "I don't have time for that" was always my favorite thing that I said before all of this happened. I don't have enough time. And so I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is that I really have to put my well being at the forefront of my work, of my personal life, and that everything after that becomes easier and better. But it's hard, it's very challenging in the moment to follow through with that. And so the resilience and supporting ourselves, it really takes practice every single day. I can't just wave a magic wand and we're all suddenly better at being resilient and supporting ourselves. But it's been hugely important on my journey. And just to remind everyone that if you support yourself, your work is better, your home life is better, everything that you do is better if we're supporting our own well being. So I think I'll leave it there.
Overall, it's a great session. I could say that people who are trying to balance their work life could have the greater, now they can understand how to manage the things. Also for the audience, I could tell that they are like Allison having a page, AllisonButler.ca. I recommend everyone to visit that page because now and then she was doing a blog, now and then. Also, she is quite active in Instagram page. I will leave her website and Instagram page details on the description. If anyone want to reach, or any organization if you want to reach, she's a great resource, and she's a good resource to you can work on, and you can fix how boost your employee performance. With this, the session has come to an end, and I hope you had a great summer. Thank Alison, thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you so much.